Sarah had never thought of herself as someone who would step into a martial arts class. A simple woman living a simple life, she had never felt the need to prove anything to anyone. She was happy with her routine, content with her job, and at peace with the quiet life she led. But deep down, she had always wanted to try something new, something that would challenge her. One day, after watching a jiu-jitsu match on TV, Sarah felt an unfamiliar stir inside her. She had been curious about martial arts for a while but never had the courage to start. Today, however, something was different. The thought of pushing her limits, of stepping outside her comfort zone, excited her. Without overthinking it, she searched online for the closest jiu-jitsu gym and signed up for a beginner's class. The decision felt right, even if it was terrifying. The following afternoon, Sarah entered the gym with a nervous smile. She wore an old pair of leggings and a simple t-shirt. She had no idea what to expect, but she was determined to try. As she stepped inside, she immediately felt the intensity of the gym. The air was thick with energy, filled with the sound of grunts and the slap of feet hitting the mat. The room was buzzing with people in all shapes and sizes, each person focused on their practice. Some were practicing by themselves, others in pairs, rolling on the mats, while a few sparred in the corners of the room. It was a whole new world for Sarah, and it felt overwhelming. She walked to the front desk, where a friendly woman greeted her. "Are you here for your first class?" she asked. Sarah nodded, unsure of what to say. The woman handed her a waiver form to sign and pointed her towards the changing room. "Just change into something comfortable, and we'll get started soon." After changing into the simple clothes she had brought, Sarah returned to the mat, where a group of people had already gathered. They were all in their GI uniforms, their bodies well defined from the years of practice. As Sarah stood awkwardly on the side, waiting for the class to begin, she noticed how focused and serious everyone seemed. They moved with purpose, their bodies flowing through techniques with ease. Sarah's second week in the gym had been better than the first, but she knew that she was still far from where she wanted to be. She spent the next few days reflecting on what she had learned, practicing the moves she had struggled with, and pushing herself to improve. Every day, she went over the basics, focusing on technique and control rather than speed or strength. The more she practiced, the more she understood the importance of patience. There was no shortcut to success in jiu-jitsu. Every small improvement, every perfect motion mattered. The days seemed to pass quickly for Sarah, each one blending into the next, as she continued to train, learn, and improve. It was a slow process, but it was also a rewarding one. Every class presented new challenges and new opportunities to test her skills. Even when she felt tired or frustrated, she knew that each step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. The more she practiced, the more confident she became, not only in her jiu-jitsu abilities but also in herself. One afternoon, as Sarah arrived at the gym, there was an air of anticipation. The gym was busier than usual, and the atmosphere felt different, more intense. The instructor stood at the front, giving instructions with a certain seriousness in his voice. Sarah, still a little uncertain, joined the class and began to stretch with the others. Today was going to be special. The instructor announced that they would be working on submissions, specifically, submissions from the mount position. It was a critical part of jiu-jitsu, and Sarah knew that mastering it would take time and effort. But that didn't faze her. She was used to putting in the work now. She was used to being patient and persistent, even when things didn't go as planned. The class began with the instructor demonstrating a few different submission techniques. Sarah watched closely, focusing on every small detail: the way the instructor positioned his body, the pressure he applied, the way his hands moved with precision. It all made sense to Sarah now. Every move had a purpose. Every motion flowed into the next. When it was time to pair up and practice the techniques, Sarah was paired with Ethan again. Their last few sparring sessions had been different, more respectful, more focused, but today felt different. Today, Sarah was going to push herself further. She had made huge strides in her training, but she knew there was still room for improvement. They began practicing the submission techniques, first starting with the basics. Sarah worked hard, trying to get every detail right. It wasn't easy, but she could feel the progress. She was more controlled, more confident with her movements. The repetition of each technique was beginning to pay off. Sarah felt herself becoming more familiar with the mount position, learning how to control her opponent and set up for the submission. Her technique wasn't perfect, but it was much more fluid than before. She could see the difference in her own execution. After a few rounds of drilling, the instructor called for sparring. Sarah's heart rate quickened. It wasn't just a practice session anymore. This was real. And once again, she found herself facing Ethan. There was a moment of tension between them as they squared off on the mat. But Sarah had learned not to let that affect her. This wasn't about proving anything to Ethan, it was about testing herself. She had been working toward this moment for weeks, and now, she was ready. As the match began, Ethan came at her quickly, attempting to use his strength and experience to overpower her. But Sarah had learned to stay calm under pressure. She moved with purpose, anticipating his moves and reacting accordingly. She didn't try to match his strength with her own. Instead, she used technique, positioning herself in ways that made his strength irrelevant. Ethan tried to move quickly, but Sarah was one step ahead. She could feel the rhythm of the fight, and for the first time, she felt completely in control. When Ethan attempted to take her down, Sarah sidestepped and countered. She moved with more fluidity, her movements a reflection of all the hours she had spent practicing. It wasn't about speed or power. It was about precision and timing. Sarah wasn't just defending herself, she was taking the fight to Ethan, using the techniques she had learned to put herself in the dominant position. For a few moments, it felt like the world around them had slowed down. Ethan was still strong, but Sarah had learned to use his strength against him. The moves felt natural, like second nature. Her body moved effortlessly from one position to the next, and she could sense Ethan's frustration growing as he struggled to regain control. Then, Sarah saw her opportunity. She had him in a mount position, and she immediately went for the submission she had been practicing. She locked in the choke hold smoothly, the way the instructor had shown them, using her body to maintain control. She felt Ethan tense beneath her, but this time, Sarah didn't hesitate. She kept the pressure steady, focusing on her technique, not letting any distraction get in the way. Ethan, realizing he had no escape, tapped out. The gym fell into a brief silence as Sarah held the position for a moment before releasing the hold. It wasn't the same overwhelming rush of excitement as the first time she had beaten him, but there was something different about this victory. This time, it wasn't just about the win. It was about the process, the dedication, and the progress she had made. Ethan sat up, breathing heavily, and gave Sarah a look of quiet acknowledgement. There was no smirk, no taunt. Just respect. Sarah smiled to herself, but she knew that this moment wasn't the end. It was a part of a much larger journey. As the class ended, Sarah felt a sense of contentment. She had come so far from the woman who had first walked into the gym, uncertain and unsure of herself. But now, she was stronger, not just in body, but in mind. She had learned the value of persistence, of pushing through the doubts, and of trusting the process. She wasn't a beginner anymore, and while there was still a long way to go, Sarah knew that she had earned her place in this gym. When Sarah left the gym that evening, she felt a sense of quiet pride. She wasn't the same person who had walked in a few months ago. She had worked hard, faced challenges, and overcome them. There was a new fire inside her, a determination to keep pushing forward, no matter what came next. The road ahead was still long, but Sarah was no longer afraid of the obstacles. She knew that with each day, each class, and each challenge, she would grow stronger. And that was all that mattered. By the time the third class rolled around, Sarah was ready. She woke up early, had a light break. The weeks that followed Sarah's surprising victory over Ethan felt like a whirlwind of progress and challenges. She had come a long way from the nervous woman who had walked into the gym for the first time. But now, every time she stepped onto the mat, it felt like she was testing herself in new ways. Her confidence had grown, but so had her awareness of how much she still had to learn. Each class felt like a chance to push herself further, to see how much more she could improve. One of the biggest changes Sarah noticed was how her body had started to adapt. At first, she had felt stiff and unsure with every movement. Now, she could feel her muscles working together, her body responding more naturally to the techniques. She was still far from being an expert, but the gap between her and the other students was closing. There were fewer mistakes, and the ones she did make didn't discourage her the way they once had. She was starting to believe that she could really do this. However, that didn't mean the road was easy. Every class still had its difficulties, and Sarah knew that in a sport like Jiu-Jitsu, no one was ever done learning. There was always a new move to master, a new challenge to face. But Sarah didn't mind. She had learned to love the process, the small victories, and even the setbacks. They were all part of the journey. This particular class started like any other. The instructor gathered everyone around to demonstrate a new technique, a choke hold from the top position. Sarah watched closely, absorbing every detail of the instructor's movements. She practiced the technique in pairs with a fellow student, trying to execute the move with precision. It wasn't easy. The position felt awkward at first, and her partner was much stronger than her. But Sarah was determined. She knew that if she kept trying, she would get it. Halfway through the drill, the instructor walked around to offer corrections. Sarah worked diligently, making sure to correct her grip, adjust her position, and follow through with the proper form. She could see improvement in her technique as the class went on, but it wasn't until sparring began that she truly felt how far she had come. As the bell rang to signal the start of sparring, Sarah's heart raced. She had been paired with Ethan again. The previous match between them still lingered in her mind. It wasn't about beating him, it was about proving to herself that she could hold her own against someone with far more experience. The feeling of that moment, when she had executed the perfect sweep and forced him to tap, was still fresh. But she wasn't going to focus on that. This time, she was going to stay in the present, focus on the techniques, and keep improving. Ethan gave her a nod as they squared off, no taunts, no smirks. It was different now. He had stopped underestimating her. And though he still had a calm confidence, Sarah could see that he was taking her seriously. She wasn't the same woman who had fumbled through their last sparring session. She had earned his respect. The match began, and immediately, Ethan took the offensive. His movements were sharp and quick, as expected, and Sarah had to move fast to keep up. She had learned to stay calm in these moments, not to panic when her opponent came at her with intensity. This time, she anticipated his moves better, feeling the rhythm of the fight. When he went for a takedown, Sarah shifted her weight and sprawled, just like she had practiced. She managed to stay on her feet, keeping her balance steady, and countered with a quick sweep that sent him off balance. Ethan rolled away, clearly impressed. "Nice," he said, but it wasn't the dismissive tone from before. It was more like acknowledgement. He came back at her with a flurry of moves, but Sarah was ready. She blocked, parried, and slipped through his defenses. They continued to exchange moves, each one a step in the dance of Jiu-Jitsu. Then, in the middle of the exchange, Ethan tried to pull a move that he had successfully used on her before. He reached for her collar to attempt a choke, but Sarah saw it coming. She used the technique she had been practicing to escape. With a swift turn and a quick move, she broke free from his grasp and regained control. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Ethan looked at her with a new respect in his eyes. As the match went on, Sarah felt stronger. She was thinking more clearly, using her body more efficiently. Even though Ethan was still the stronger fighter, Sarah's ability to anticipate his moves and react quickly made it harder for him to dominate her. At one point, she managed to get into a dominant position on top of him, something that, just a few weeks ago, she would have thought impossible. Ethan tried to escape, but Sarah had the leverage. She kept him in place, using her body to maintain control. The feeling of being on top, of having the upper hand in the fight, filled her with a quiet pride. She wasn't overpowering him with strength, but with technique. The submission came quickly, and for the second time, Ethan tapped out. The bell rang to signal the end of the sparring, and Sarah stepped back, her heart pounding. She looked at Ethan, waiting for his response. He sat up slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead, and gave her a nod. "Good match," he said. It wasn't a compliment given lightly, and Sarah knew that it came from a place of genuine respect. She had earned it. As the class wrapped up, Sarah felt a rush of satisfaction. She had come so far in such a short time, but she also knew that this was just one step in her journey. There would be more challenges, more tough matches, but she was ready for them. She had proven to herself that she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. And every time she stepped onto the mat, she was getting closer to becoming the fighter she wanted to be. When Sarah left the gym that day, she walked out with a quiet confidence. She wasn't done yet, but she knew that she was on the right path. The journey was far from over, but with each class, each match, she was getting stronger both in body and mind. Fast, and made her way to the gym. The usual nervousness was there, but it was mixed with excitement. This was her chance to test how far she had come. She wasn't expecting to be perfect, but she knew she had made progress, and that was enough for now. When she arrived, the gym was already buzzing with activity. She changed into her GI and took a deep breath before stepping onto the mat. As she walked in, she could see Ethan already sparring with another student. His movements were fluid, confident, and precise. He looked like someone who had done this 1,000 times, and yet, Sarah didn't feel as intimidated as before. She had learned not to compare herself to him. She was on her own path, focused on her own progress. The class began, and Sarah listened carefully as the instructor explained the drill for the day. It was a combination of several moves: takedowns, sweeps, and escapes. Sarah had been practicing these at home, but there was something different about doing them in class, surrounded by others. The pressure was different. The gym had a way of making everything feel real, and today, Sarah was determined to not just survive but to truly engage with the practice. The instructor paired everyone up, and once again, Sarah found herself facing Ethan. This time, there was no mockery in his eyes, but instead a cool, detached focus. It seemed that he was taking her a bit more seriously, but she wasn't sure if it was because he had seen her improve or if he just had a natural confidence that came with his years of experience. They began their drills, practicing the combination of moves the instructor had shown them. Sarah took a deep breath and started with the first move, a simple takedown. She had done this in previous classes, but today, it felt smoother. She used her body weight more efficiently and felt a small victory when she successfully executed the move on Ethan. It wasn't perfect, but it was effective, and for a moment, she saw the briefest flicker of surprise in Ethan's eyes. He quickly recovered and went on the offensive, attempting to take Sarah down. Sarah could feel his strength, but this time, she wasn't afraid. She used the defense she had practiced, the one where she shifted her body and used her opponent's momentum against them. It worked again. She could feel Ethan's grip loosening just enough for her to execute the next move, a sweep that sent him off balance. Ethan rolled back onto the mat, looking at her with a raised eyebrow. "Not bad," he said, his voice neutral. But there was something different in the way he said it. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was the surprise of being caught off guard. Sarah didn't care. She didn't need to hear praise from him. She knew what she had accomplished. The drill continued, with Sarah feeling more and more at ease. She wasn't rushing through the movements like she had in the past. She was taking her time, making each motion deliberate, feeling the flow of each step. She was learning to control not just her body but also her mind. In Jiu-Jitsu, the mental aspect was just as important as the physical. Patience, focus, and the ability to stay calm under pressure were all key to success. After the drill, the instructor called for sparring. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming. Ethan would be her partner again, and this time, it was for real. No more drills, no more controlled movements. This was a test of everything she had learned. As they squared off on the mat, Sarah felt her nerves rising. Ethan's presence was imposing. He was fast, strong, and experienced. But this time, Sarah had something he didn't expect: focus. She had trained hard, and she was ready to put everything into practice. The bell rang, and Ethan lunged at her with quick, fluid movements. He tried to grab her, but Sarah was ready. She sidestepped and ducked under his reach, remembering the footwork drills she had practiced. She could hear his footsteps behind her as he tried to circle around, but she was already moving, anticipating his next move. Ethan's attacks came faster now, but Sarah stayed calm, her mind clear. She blocked, countered, and used every bit of technique she had learned. Then, it happened. Ethan made a slight mistake. He left an opening, just a small one, but it was enough. Sarah acted quickly, taking advantage of his mistake. In one smooth motion, she transitioned into a sweep and ended up on top of him, securing a dominant position. Ethan struggled beneath her, but Sarah had already learned the key to control: leverage, balance, and timing. She kept her position solid, using her body weight to keep him in place. Ethan, who had been the one always in control before, now found himself on the defensive. Sarah wasn't giving him any room to escape. She held him in place, making sure he couldn't move, couldn't get out of the hold. He tried to wriggle free, but it was no use. In the end, Ethan tapped out something that shocked everyone in the gym, including Sarah herself. The moment the tap came, Sarah stepped back, letting go of the hold. Ethan sat up, breathing heavily. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the respect in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. Sarah had done what he thought was impossible for someone so new. She had done what he, the black belt, couldn't escape from in that moment. As the class ended, Sarah felt a rush of accomplishment. The gym members gathered around, exchanging their thoughts on the sparring session. Ethan stood off to the side, speaking with some of the other students, but he kept glancing back at Sarah. It wasn't the same look as before. This time, there was no smugness, no condescension. Just recognition of her skill. Walking out of the gym, Sarah felt a quiet pride inside her. It wasn't about beating Ethan, it was about proving to herself that all the hard work was paying off. She had entered this gym as a beginner, unsure of herself, but now, she was someone who could stand her ground. There was still a long way to go, but she wasn't afraid of the challenge. She had learned that persistence, hard work, and patience could take her further than she ever thought possible. "All right, everyone, gather around," the instructor called out. Sarah quickly joined the group, feeling like an outsider. Her nervousness grew as she looked around at the experienced faces of the gym members, most of them looking far more confident than she felt. The following week, Sarah walked back into the gym with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had spent the last few days practicing at home, watching online videos, and even trying out some moves in front of her mirror. She had a goal now, not just to survive the class but to prove to herself that she could learn and grow. When she entered the gym, it felt a little less intimidating than before. The familiar sounds of mats being slapped and feet shuffling filled the air. But there was something different about Sarah this time. She walked with more confidence, her head held high. She knew she wasn't going to master everything right away, but she was determined to try. As she changed into her GI, she noticed that the gym was a bit busier today. More people were gathered around, chatting with each other, laughing, and sharing tips. Sarah felt the familiar rush of nerves, but this time, she pushed it down. She was here to learn, not to impress anyone. The instructor, a seasoned black belt, stood in front of the group, ready to begin the class. Sarah joined the rest of the students, taking her place at the back of the group. As the instructor started with a few basic warm-up drills, Sarah felt her muscles loosen up. The movements felt more fluid this time, and she was able to keep up without feeling completely out of place. Soon, the class was divided into pairs, and Sarah was paired with Ethan, the same black belt who had mocked her last week. He had a casual, almost arrogant look on his face as he approached her. His confidence was palpable, and it was clear that he didn't think much of Sarah's abilities. He hadn't forgotten their previous sparring session, and judging by the smirk on his face, he wasn't about to let her forget it either. "Ready for round 2, he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you've improved since last time." Sarah didn't respond to his taunt. Instead, she focused on what she had learned in the last week. She knew that Ethan was going to try to make her look bad, but that didn't mean she had to let him. She wasn't here to fight him, she was here to improve herself. Ethan's words didn't carry the same weight as they did before. She was past letting them affect her. The instructor called for everyone to begin their drills. Sarah and Ethan started with a basic takedown. Ethan immediately moved into position, grabbing Sarah's arms and trying to force her into a defensive position. He made it look effortless, like he had done this 1,000 times. He clearly had no intention of making things easy for her. But Sarah had been practicing. She had spent hours in the gym and at home, studying techniques and practicing them repeatedly. She wasn't perfect, but she was getting better. This time, as Ethan attempted to take her down, Sarah remembered the technique she had learned. Instead of resisting with brute force, she shifted her weight and used his momentum against him. To Ethan's surprise, she executed the move almost perfectly. For a split second, Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief, but then, almost instinctively, he recovered and quickly regained control. He looked at Sarah with a mix of amusement and annoyance. "Not bad," he said, as if he were indulging her. "But not nearly enough to beat me." Sarah wasn't discouraged. She had been in a similar situation before, people underestimating her, thinking they could walk all over her. But this time, she wasn't about to let it slide. The rest of the class continued with their drills, but Sarah's focus never wavered. She watched every movement, every technique, paying close attention to the smallest details. As the class progressed, Sarah's confidence began to grow. She could feel the difference in her body, the way her movements were becoming smoother, more controlled. Even the basic moves that had felt awkward the week before now seemed more natural. Every time she executed a move successfully, she could sense the improvement. It was small progress, but progress nonetheless. Despite her efforts, Ethan continued to taunt her whenever he could. After one of the drills, he shook his head and said, "You're improving, but you're still a long way from being a challenge." He added a laugh, expecting Sarah to respond with frustration or anger. But this time, she didn't. Instead, she smiled politely. "I'm here to learn, Ethan. Not to compete with you." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Ethan looked taken aback. He wasn't used to someone not rising to his provocation. Sarah's calm demeanor caught him off guard. He had expected her to be embarrassed, to shrink in the face of his criticism. But she was different now. She was stronger, mentally and physically, and it showed in the way she held herself. The class moved on to more advanced techniques. Ethan continued to spar with Sarah, but now, he found that she wasn't the easy target he thought she would be. She wasn't flawless, but her persistence was starting to make him uncomfortable. She had learned how to evade his attacks, how to use his strength against him. For every move he made, Sarah had a counter. And though she still struggled to execute some of the more difficult techniques, she kept trying, refusing to give up. As the class wrapped up, the instructor gathered everyone for a quick review. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment, even though she knew she wasn't anywhere near the level of the others. The instructor walked around, offering feedback to the students. When he came to Sarah, he gave her a nod of approval. "You're improving quickly," he said. "Keep it up. It's all about persistence." Sarah smiled, grateful for the encouragement. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, she noticed Ethan talking with a few of the other gym members. He glanced in her direction, and for the first time, Sarah saw a hint of respect in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. As Sarah walked out of the gym, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead. But she was determined to keep going. She wasn't going to let anyone define her, least of all someone who had underestimated her from the start. Her journey had just begun, but already, she could feel the changes inside herself. And this time, it was clear, she wasn't going to back down. Among the group was a man who stood out to Sarah. He was tall, with a chiseled physique, and wore a black belt. Ethan. He carried himself with an air of superiority, walking with a confident stride and a smirk on his face. It was obvious that he was one of the top practitioners in the gym. Sarah felt a little intimidated, but she reminded herself that this was her chance to start fresh, to begin learning something new. The class began, and the instructor demonstrated some basic moves. Sarah struggled to keep up, her movements slow and clumsy compared to the others. She felt embarrassed as the instructor demonstrated a simple guard pass and then asked the class to pair up and practice it. She wasn't sure who to team up with, but before she could make a decision, Ethan, the black belt, walked over to her. He looked her up and down with a raised eyebrow, his smirk still present. "You're new here, huh?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you." Sarah forced a smile, trying to hide her discomfort. She nodded. "Thanks. I'm just here to learn." Ethan didn't seem interested in helping her learn, though. He moved to his position on the mat and waited for her to make the first move. Sarah hesitated, unsure of herself. She had no idea how to begin. Her hands felt clammy, and her heart was pounding in her chest. But this was it, she had to push through her nerves. As they began the drill, Sarah fumbled through the basic steps. Ethan barely moved, letting her make the first attempt and then quickly countering her. He made it look effortless. His smirk grew wider, as if he were enjoying her struggle. "Is that all you've got?" Ethan teased, his voice laced with sarcasm. "I thought you were here to learn, not to waste time." The comment stung, but Sarah didn't say anything. Instead, she tried again, determined to do better. She knew she wasn't going to get it right immediately, but that didn't mean she should give up. Ethan continued to play the role of the helpful instructor, offering no real guidance, just mocking her every mistake. As the class went on, Sarah felt more and more out of place. She could hear the others whispering, some of them chuckling under their breath. Every time she fumbled or hesitated, it felt like the laughter echoed in her ears. But she refused to let it break her. She was here to learn, and no matter how awkward or out of place she felt, she wasn't going to quit. After the class ended, the instructor gave a brief overview of what they'd practiced, and then everyone began to leave. Sarah gathered her things slowly, her heart heavy with frustration. She had hoped for a welcoming atmosphere, a chance to learn without judgment, but instead, it had felt like a trial. She was used to being an outsider in situations like this, but it still stung. As she walked out of the gym, Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "Is that all you've got?" The mockery in his voice had made her second-guess her decision to join. But she refused to let that be the end of it. She was going to come back. She wasn't going to let one class, one person, or one experience stop her from achieving what she had set out to do. The next morning, Sarah woke up early and went for a jog, feeling determined. She reminded herself that nothing worth achieving came easily. If this was going to be a challenge, she was ready to face it head on. She wasn't just doing this for anyone else, she was doing it for herself. Sarah wasn't sure what the next class would hold, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to back down. And the next time she stepped onto the mat, she was going to make sure that everyone saw her as more than just the nervous woman who had stumbled through her first class. She would show them that she was capable of more.